Okay, well, welcome back to the introductory course, our Introduction to Buddhism continued. So I believe this is the sixth sixth class. Um, so we will continue and try to pick up where we left off last time. So I believe we were covering the 10 precepts. And one of the reasons I wanted to go over this concept is if you go to a Shingon temple, you write the 10 precepts as part of the service, as a standard part of the service. And I think sometimes we recite these statements without really thinking about them very deeply. And it's, I believe, all parts of Buddhist practice are really about our thinking about these ideas more deeply and understanding them, not simply saying them out loud or taking them because they're written somewhere or accepting them without thought. The true power of these ideas comes from us thinking about it and thinking about it more broadly and thinking about it over time and thinking about how it might apply to our lives in different ways. So, although they seem simple, there are deeper aspects to the ideas and how we might apply them. So, as I mentioned previously, the 10 precepts are broken up into three categories of actions. So, actions of body, actions of speech, and actions of mind. So, these are the three ways in which you can create karma, right? Three volitional actions, three categories of volitional action. So, last time we talked about actions of speech. So, tonight I want to go and start off with the conversation and discuss the actions of the body, so physical actions, and then actions of mind. So, many of these things, again, probably, will seem very straightforward and self explanatory. But I will, ask us to think about it more holistically and how it might affect us. And again, right, how do these precepts, how do these guidelines for living affect others? So these are important concepts in Buddhist practice. Um, you will hear me often say meditation isn't something that you do only on a cushion. Mindfulness isn't something you do, alone in a room. These precepts are how you take mindfulness out into society. It's how you share your practice with family and friends. It's how you share your practice with the world. It's your outlook on the world and how we're trying to train ourselves. So these are not what don't do this or else you get punished. They're not a some sort of you know naughty and nice list for Santa Claus. This is really meant to be something we should reflect on. Um, Personally, when I'm doing the service and we recite the 10 precepts, I usually have some new insight, either for the implications of my own actions, the implications of city, country. We may be able to see them in ways that we didn't realize were relevant to us. So um, that's what we'll try to go over this evening. So before I start in, were there any questions that arose from the last class? We covered the actions of speech. Tried to go through those. Were there any questions from those at all?
Kosho,
Yes.
I have a question related to that.
Yes.
Um, so, how do you differentiate speech from mind? I mean, what differentiates the two? I mean, it
Between
seems that there's a, and maybe I'll just leave it at that.
no, so just to be sure, you said between speech and mind.
Right. They seem like entwined. Speech is mind. Mind is it can be speech. I don't
Oh,
know.
definitely, definitely. So, if you look at deeper theories of Buddhist consciousness, all of these are going to start with a thought, and then they're going to manifest in some way. So these are maybe we could say aspects of thinking or directions of thinking. Um, so a thought itself in the very beginning might not have a value judgment associated with it. Um, an idea springs forth, and then um, we make decisions based on that idea, that the concept in the mind. So the types of speech, and these are in general kind of general categories. Um, there are other sutras that get into very deep specifics with regard to how they function. So this should be considered sort of a starting point. But a lot of these are going to be how we manifest, right? How we what, they're really looking at volitional action. So, and this is I think helpful when we distinguish what is karma. Um, a lot of people in the West, we use the concept of karma in terms of, well, whenever someone says karma, it's always something bad, right? Um, that's your karma for doing this, right? And they mean it, you got your comeuppance in some form. In a strict, Buddhist philosophical sense, karma is any volitional action. So a karmic action is something you intend to do. Um, so if you are driving down the road and a bug hits your windshield, you didn't intend to kill the bug, so you don't have the karma of killing the bug, which is different from, um, you see the squirrel in the road and you speed up and swerve to hit it. You're intentionally doing it. So these would be things where the thought has arisen, um, and you begin to put a lot of intention behind a particular focus. So, but they are, in general, starting points. In texts like the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Huayan you will find even more detail. Um, it really almost reads like a manual of psychology about certain thoughts, certain actions, and to use a kind of a classic metaphor, all the ripples in the pond, all the ways that they may um, go out from us and affect others. So the 10 precepts are I think it's also true for most things in the service. They are um, a convenient outline, a convenient list of bullet points to help keep us focused and to remind us. But what I want to try to do tonight is maybe start the process of thinking more broadly about them. But you're right, they all would start with the mind. They're all going to start with thought. Um, you don't just you know do one of these actions from nowhere. Hope that's helpful. Any other questions? Apologies, I'm sort of backlit, so the lighting is odd tonight. Nope. Okay. So we will continue with the 10 precepts. And as I said, I'm trying to, as a way of orienting ourselves. What kind of things would you encounter if you came into the temple? You most likely would participate in a service, and you'd be going through reciting the 10 precepts. Later in the class, we'll probably go through some of the symbolism and items that you might see in the temple. Why we use incense and things like that. So I want to try to introduce all of those concepts, because I am famous or infamous. I don't know. One way of saying everything in the temple has a purpose. Um, it's not just there because it's pretty. It might be pretty, but there is a reason why it was placed there. some symbolism that's coming from the sutras, something that's pointing us back to the teaching. Um, there's a historical and teaching reason for all the symbolic things that we might see. As we get to learn those, it really helps to connect that to practice. It really helps to connect it to things that we're learning. So we study something in a book, and then you come into a temple, either in North America, or you travel to Japan. You have a greater appreciation for the art and symbolism and all these different concepts. So they're being taught to you not only in a written form, not only in a liturgical manner, something you're going to recite, but they're also going to be taught or emphasized or what provided to you through a variety of different means. So we'll try to go over some of those symbolic things. So last time we covered, like I said, the those precepts that have to do with speech. So tonight I want to talk about those that refer to the body. So the first of those three that refer to actions of the body would be killing, so taking life. So anyone want to guess why killing would be discouraged? Because it's bad, right? But why is it bad? Why is killing bad? Why do we discourage it?
Because it's ourself.
That's one reason. So one of the in the chat box, one of the recommendations is it would be the opposite of compassionate. Yes, one of the other recommendations is killing can't take place without hatred, and we should respect all life. That's true, but why? Why should we respect life? Why not? Why not only be self-interested? A lot easier, right? Only be interested in yourself. Who cares about others? Why should it matter? Life is sacred. Who says? Prove it. Remember, Buddhism is something, it straddles this religion and philosophy definition. So why? Selfishness. Why isn't selfishness good? Won't you get more profit if you're selfish? Ah, there's one. Muhammad's iPhone is speaking. So you ruin someone else's chance to obtain enlightenment. Ah, now that's closer. Yes. Carlin, the act of destruction affects the ability of others to act with compassion. Right. So I really want us to think about, get away from we've all been taught certain things should be avoided, right? And some of this feels natural. We may recoil at the thought of killing personally, but if we really think about the why, I think we have a deeper understanding in terms of what the teaching, what the Buddha was talking about. So step one, if you kill, you cut off the ability of that other life to do any practice. You cut off, what it is that they are trying to do in their lifetime. You're limiting their opportunities, and by extension, right, you're affecting those. Let's say, the person you kill, the life form you kill, has other people that depend on them. So now you've destroyed the life of the other. So if you kill one person, you're taking away a provider. You've taken away a son, you've taken away a husband, you've taken away a father. You affect a family. You create this pain and ripple in a society, in a local community. Maybe they're a teacher and you've taken away their ability to touch their students. You don't necessarily know at the moment of the killing what was this person was going to go on to do in their life, what kind of accomplishments they were going to provide to society as a whole. So that action is so consequential that it's creating, tremendous ripples through time and space. So from that perspective, the Buddha would say, we should avoid killing, especially intentional killing. Um, there's more, right? So let's say I kill someone. So now instead of a son, who teaches Buddhism, my mother has a killer for a son, and people shun her, and the ideas and hopes and dreams that she had for me now switch. Right now, my son is this killer. Um, your own family. So the action goes forwards and backwards, right? It ripples out behind you. The people that know you, care for you, will now see you differently. Um, so this action is very powerful. So it's moving in multiple directions. So the more we think like really deeply about the action of killing, we understand incredibly how consequential it is and how much it affects our society, how much it shifts, you know, the perspective others have of us, how it cuts off and can destroy the lives of others. Um, and so it's something that we have to really give consideration to, because sometimes we throw this word around, um, oh, I want to kill that guy, or if anyone ever did X, Y, or Z, I would kill them. So sometimes we have exceptions to the concept of killing. Normally I wouldn't kill, but this one thing that would push me over the edge. So it's useful to consider it. The other side of killing is, I've known people who have killed. Um, Thankfully, they've all been uh, police officers or military, so they took life in that context. Um, I heard directly from a police officer years ago, and they had to kill. They had to kill to save the life of another, and um, it was very impactful for them. Um, and this person was, very capable, very well trained, and we had a long conversation about it, and there was no other way that they could have avoided the situation. There was no possible, in this particular, I think it was like a hostage type thing. There was no possible scenario to end this and save the innocent person. Um, and so we talked a lot about the acceptance of the possibility of killing, when they became a police officer, understanding that and carrying that. And, he acknowledged that the action of killing caused nightmares for years. It caused tremendous trauma to himself, even though, legally, right, he's allowed to do that. In many ways, society celebrated that action. Oh, you're a hero, you saved someone. He was, perhaps not prepared before it actually happened with the effect that it had on him. I think it affected his relationships. I think it affected, how he related to other people, how he saw the world. So this this action of killing is incredibly powerful. And if you think about, um, how we kill, it's always as a process of dehumanizing the other. So, when soldiers go to war, the military doesn't say, okay, we're going to send you into this village, and the village has, 400 young men, all of whom who have mothers and sisters just like you, and they have hopes and dreams just like you. They don't talk about it that way. They say, this is the enemy, and you have to neutralize the enemy. Right? Our language changes, and this is done to sort of make it easier to wear down the barriers that we have to taking life. So this is something we have to, I think, really give consideration to when we hear, um, going back to the earlier question, right? Doesn't everything start with a thought? It does. It starts with this thought, and then we try to rationalize how to get to this end point, right? How do I find an exception to this rule? Um, but it has a incredibly disruptive um, effect on our consciousness and the consciousness of others. So, another example I'll give is I was in college, and a friend of mine asked me to drive with her to her family's house. They owned a tow truck company, and they had to switch cars. So I think part of the benefit of a tow truck company is people never come and get their cars. So if you have kids in college, they would just say, "Come home and get a new car," because someone left it, right? So she was going to get a new car. So we go to her uncle's house, which they ran the dispatch for the tow truck. And while they sorted out the car, I sat and talked to the uncle, and a really interesting guy. He had served in the Korean War, and at that moment, he just decided to open up, and he said, uh, this was the forgotten war. Nobody remembers us as vets, and he said it was really horrible, and he just, I think, spontaneously, I don't know why, but just started talking about his experience and the horrors of the war and how it haunted him, even decades and decades later. So even though he felt he was justified, right, that the battle was the right thing to do, I don't think, as a young man, 18, 19, 20, he gave consideration to um, how deeply it would affect him, and because of that horror, how he would never be able to talk about it. Um, as we drove back to college, my friend said, no one ever has ever heard him talk about the war. It's the first time we've ever heard him, discuss it. Uh, so I don't know if, just another guy sitting at the table, he felt comfortable talking about it, but really opening up. And what he shared was really horrific. Um, you know, if you're unfamiliar with the Korean War, part of the obstacle was the cold, um, and so just trying to navigate. So they lost a lot of soldiers just to the cold, not even to um, the enemy, but just the environment, how they had to live in the trenches and all these kind of things. So um, this kind of uh, action has an impact that I think largely our society hides from us. So if you think back to the time of the Buddha, right? So we go to the life story of the Buddha, and one of the three messengers, the messenger of death, right? The young Buddha as a prince leaves the palace, and he encounters death for the first time. He sees a cadaver in the street, because these are ancient times, right? They don't have mortuary service to take the bodies, so you would see death very, very immediate, very much right in front of you. So I think seeing that was very impactful for the Buddha. In many ways, I think in modern society, we don't have that. Unless you grew up on a farm, most of us don't confront death directly. And for that reason, I think sometimes death and killing is sort of glorified in a way, because we don't have a direct experience. And more society removes that from our consciousness. So this precept against killing is to really, um, on the one hand, explain how impactful this action is, how destructive it is, and that it goes out in all directions. It affects us, it affects those that care about us, it affects the person who was killed, it affects all those who care about that person, it affects the entire community. Um, I think it also right, for modern people should give us consideration into how killing and death are discussed and what's not said, right? So, are there any questions on? I don't want to belabor the most, the darkest of the 10 precepts, but I think it helps us to think more broadly, um, especially when what um, we hear in our society oftentimes on television, you know, that such and such a country or such and such group of people are an enemy or a threat, or something goes against our national interest, um, and somehow that justifies the killing. So um, that's something to be aware of, right? How that language is used to hide these actions from us. Okay, I will move along. So we
Oh,
don't.
wait, Kosho Sensei.
Yes.
Um, did you see Brian's question in the chat
Oh,
and also Renato?
I'm sorry. Thank you for
No problem. You're welcome.
everyone. This is why it's helpful to have a co-host so we can keep track of all the. Yes, actually. So Brian's question, killing to protect others. There, there is this question actually came up during the Buddha's time, right? So the Buddha did not tell kings to get rid of their armies, right? This is before police, but they didn't say, get rid of all weapons and military. It was more that this has to be used appropriately. So there may be times where, in defense of others, that is unavoidable, right? So as much as we say you shouldn't kill, um, I think the reason why is also very important. Um, Selfishly, um, out of anger, these kind of things are very different than in self-defense. However, the realities of, right, in the example I gave with a police officer, he was still haunted by what he was required to do, but we talked for hours, and we agreed there was really no other option. It wasn't an option for him to walk away from the situation, or not save the hostage. So we also have to be aware that when we're put in that situation, that it's going to have a tremendously deep impact on us. I've known people. Um, if you're new, I did not grow up in a very good neighborhood, so it was not uncommon for um, you know home invasion and people to have to use violence in self-defense. All of them were haunted by it. So um, at the very least, I think sometimes our society glorifies violence. It's not. Um, it's not fun. It's not. Um, it's not something you walk away from and say, "Well, I was justified, so I'm going to sleep well tonight." It changes people, and from a perspective of practice, if you're put in that situation, that's going to be an obstacle, right? That's going to be something that has to be worked on. That's going to be a huge hurdle. So part of the precepts here is recommending that we avoid, um, those situations. We avoid those actions, recognizing that there may be a time when um, it's unavoidable, right? One of the other questions is the intent to kill innate behavior or learned behavior? Um, I think I think the potential for violence is, right, we all have that. You know, any of our mothers would have probably, done quite a bit of damage to someone if they tried to hurt us when we were children. So I think that is, natural. The question is, where is the violence? Where's that instinct coming from? Um, so, we can come up with a scenario. Let's say a few years from now, the temple has a daycare center and I'm the only one there, and someone breaks in and says, I'm going to kill all the children. My only solution is to kill the person. Okay, sensei, what do you do? Um, so we can have these thought experiments. Um, More likely, right? The more likely scenario is we get very angry about something. Um, we get we are blinded by our emotions or our desires, and as a result, we commit some sort of violence, and it leads to someone's death. I think this is a more common and more likely scenario. Um, so this is something we have to be aware of, because the it's not that hard. We can practice. We can say we're very peaceful people, and then something may trigger us. So we have to really, I think part of the 10 precepts is for us to really look deeply inside and try to locate that thing that could push us over, and confront it before something triggers it, right? Something kind of pushes that button. So it's not enough to say, no, no, I'm a peaceful person. It really means, that we have to look inside. So I think these are all, in addition to being reminders, they're also invitations to look inward and to find out what that thing is. Um, Personally, right, the reason I use the example of, defending children, when I was younger, that was the one thing that I couldn't wrap my brain around. Why would someone hurt a child? And I felt, that was, beyond, um, what that was an inhuman action. There should be no hope or mercy for that person. So as a practitioner, that's something I to reflect on. Okay, when I was younger, I had this idea, and why was that? And you know try to be aware. So all of these things are, we're trying to uncover our hidden landmines before, right, we step on it and we get blown up and somebody else gets blown up too. So um, don't read them as, these are not thou shalt nots. I think all of these are, you probably will, unless you take care and are really honest with yourself and reassess on a consistent basis. So any of us are capable of these actions. We just have to be really aware. To get all the questions. I think so. Okay. Any other questions on that one? I could probably go all night long just on killing, but I don't want to leave in the class on such a heavy concept. Okay, so we'll move on to stealing. Again, seems straightforward, right? I don't think anybody here plans to attend the Dharma talk and then go burglarize anyone's house. So how do we think about stealing more broadly? In a Buddhist sense, it's taking anything that's not given, right? So that's a much broader. Something should be consciously, intentionally given to you, um, and then you can accept it. So there's no finding things. In this sense, things aren't lost. it still belongs to someone. It may be mislaid, right? Someone put it down and they forgot to pick it up later, but there's no finding. So I think if we think about not stealing in terms of this, not taking what isn't given, then it's much broader. So in the Buddhist time, when the monks and nuns were wandering for alms, this was their entire life energy was sustained by people's giving. So whatever was placed into the begging bowl, right, you would receive. You just accept. So whatever is given to you, accept it. So whatever you get back, and you look in the bowl, whatever food is there, that's what you eat. No food, you don't eat. So this was a practice. So for us, how do we think about this? Not taking what isn't given. You have to really think about people's effort, right? In how do you support yourself? How do you put food on the table? How do you pay rent? Right? So you put effort into something to maintain your life. So we really want to think about how do we avoid um, depriving another person of their labor or their income or that energy, right? So if we think about it that way, it's much broader. So stealing, in this sense, could be, um, keeping another person from getting a job. Um, it could be speaking ill of another person. Oh, we shouldn't hire them, or oh, don't let them join. So it's a much broader thing, right? If you're depriving another person of their of respect, right? So in this way, you can start to see where the precepts start to work together, right? If you speak negatively about someone, then other people have a lower respect of them, and then maybe they don't get opportunity. So then you create a situation where they're not able to, make a living. So I think, in more colloquial English, we may say, we rob them of an opportunity. So that could be a type of stealing. Um, so it's really much broader. So we have to really look at, you know, first think about how do we make a living, and how would someone disrupt what we do, and that could be a type of stealing. Um, the flip side is, why do we practice sharing? Why do we practice giving in Buddhism? It's to make us more aware of people's needs, and as we give and as we practice generosity, we get to see where we may have inadvertently been, um, taking from others. So you can take this idea of not stealing, very broadly. I think a lot of Buddhist groups do, especially when it comes to environmentalism, and think about, how we impact the world, and are we depriving other people of, their energy? Are we depriving other people of their life, of, of, of um, of their ability to live? I remember a few years ago, quinoa became very popular in America. Right, here's this grain that you can eat, and it's very healthy and rich in vitamins, and so it became a fad. Everyone was eating quinoa. And then I read a news story that a lot of people in South America now were unable to afford the quinoa because it was all being exported, and that was the grain that sustained them. So there's, you know, what the shop local, act global kind of concept. If you start to become aware, if the entire society practiced this way, we would have a different earth. So this idea of not stealing is something that we can apply when we go out into society. It's something we can apply when we're shopping, when we're making decisions. Um, it's something we can apply, when we see a wallet drop to the floor, instead of saying like, "Ooh, I got lucky today," we make an effort to return it, or make it known. Did someone lose this? It can be very simple, very basic. So again, from the same standpoint, stealing should be something we view more broadly, not oh, I'm a pickpocket, right? This kind of very direct action. I think for most of us, the direct action isn't the issue; is the indirect actions that take some thinking. It's where do we put our energy? Where do we put who do we support? What ideas do we support? So that's where we could think, right, more broadly about the concept of stealing and theft. What's a good example? Robin Hood, right? You rob from the rich, and give to the poor, and you think, oh, I'm justified, right? But there's still an effect, even if it's still stealing, even if you're. And there's a better way, I think, from a Buddhist standpoint. So we don't have any Robin Hoods. That's not a good. It's not a good example. Okay, so the third action associated with the body is sexual energy. So the precept is about not misusing your sexual energy. So misconduct that comes from sexual desire. So what would that be? So in the West, a lot of religions would interpret this as not having sex before marriage. In the East, there was no religious marriage until recently. Marriage was strictly a contract between families. So there was no religious certification of marriage. That's a relatively new concept in the East. So religious marriage is largely Christian, Jewish, Muslim concept, not so much of a something you would see in East Asia. So what would we be concerned about for this kind of misconduct? So if you're using this energy to manipulate people, if you're using it in a way that is, there's a power imbalance, right? So we have a lot of these examples coming out in society now, the Me Too movement, where people would, leverage their sexual desire to get something else. Oh, you want a part in this movie? Well, then you have to do this, right? So this would be this kind of misconduct. There's a saying in China that if I can get it right, it's worse to destroy a marriage than it is to destroy a country, right? So they actually think of tearing apart a family is worse than kind of overthrowing a government. So thinking about again all the suffering that may flow from these actions. We have a lot of, I think, examples of this in modern society. You'll see what school teachers and their students, and the impact is incredibly strong. You'll see people who've been manipulated in one way or another. So this is really looking at how we use this energy. So the energy, that's how we all got here, but it could be used to bring families together. It can be used to, bring couples closer together. It can be used to create new life, and it can also be, very manipulative and harmful. So, not avoiding any kind of abusive sexual conduct, things that create conflict between, married couples or committed couples. These are the kind of things that should be avoided. Obviously, right? Historically and then culturally, there's differences. So there's not a hard, strict line in the sand that's true for the entire world. There are other cultures in which marriages function differently, or people take multiple spouses. some multiple wives, some multiple husbands, and there's reasons for that. Sometimes that's the way wealth is transferred around cultures. So everything has to be looked at. How does it play out in that society? What is abusive or manipulative in that context? So there may not be I don't think in Buddhism we don't have only once you're married, in a special ceremony, then you can, express this energy. Marriage, Buddhist marriage is a relatively new thing. So we don't have that, requirement. But if you think about, right, probably everyone has had a broken heart, and understands, the power of that action. So giving a lot of thought to how it's expressed and when and with whom is the point of this precept, and understanding that if it's misused, again, a lot of pain can flow from that. And again, just like killing in both directions, right? Oh, I never thought that my child would be that kind of person. Or oh, I realized that my parent is that type of person. What does that do to people? So this is a kind of very strong action of the body that can be tremendously detrimental for people. Again, all of these are what, if you're trying to cultivate, if you think about engaging in spiritual practice, these are things that are going to undermine your practice. So they are not meant to, be moralizing. You're going to get a lump of coal if you do this. It's not that type of, we wrote the rule on the wall, so you better follow it. It's really suggestions to make your life easier. I'm sure all of those people who end up on the news for this kind of misconduct were thinking like, oh, if I hadn't done this, it would be so much better. I wouldn't have lost my company, my family, my reputation, and all these things. So, yeah, I don't guess anyone has questions on that one. So, but just in case, anyone have questions on that one? No, okay. So we covered the actions of speech before. So we just finished the actions of the body. So we're going to go to the actions of the mind. And then I probably would have talked to you enough this evening. So I'll talk your ear off. So the first, with regard to, a good question. Does Buddhism have a stance about sexual misconduct discriminate on the basis of gender? No. There are no, the only rules regarding gender, so there's no distinction about heterosexual, homosexual relationships. It's really irrelevant. Last lifetime you were male, next lifetime you're female. Doesn't matter. The only thing close to that in the Vinaya, there are rules for monks and nuns against flamboyant behavior, because the rules are regarding disturbing the community. So if you're very flamboyant or boisterous and this kind of thing, that would be a disturbance. If you're running around the monastery knocking on everybody's door at night, hey, can I come in? Are you interested? That's disruptive. So in that context, but no, it's totally irrelevant. In fact, in modern times, as gay marriage has become legal in states, Buddhist temples have been, some of the first to perform those weddings. There's a famous one that was done in Taiwan. It was televised. I recall when same-sex marriage was legalized in Hawaii. I think the day after, there's a full-page article from Buddhist churches of America saying, come to our temples for your wedding. So there is no, we're pretty progressive, I guess, in that way. There's no distinction, you know, nobody cares. So what's important though, you know, there are what there are relationship structures that are beyond two people, right? Sometimes multiple people. I don't have any, you know, I guess there are subcultures within America, right, that have plural marriage or people are interested in plural relationships. I don't have the experience of counseling anybody in that situation. I would say though, I've talked to a few people who, you know, have open marriages, and at least in those experiences, you know, at least one, you know, they seem to be that's what they wanted to do. So if that's an agreement, then that's their agreement. And at least in another, I saw it didn't seem balanced. Like one person was more interested in that than the other. So that's where I think it's important to right, be very open about people's feelings and motivations and emotions, because within a relationship, you know, there's a tremendous potential for you know, people to create something very strong. There's also, because of, you know, you're very open in that situation, there's a potential to be hurt in a way that's very difficult to recover from. So this is, you know, I think the Buddhist perspective is to give a lot of consideration to um, that dynamic because it is unique. That's a good question though. I get that question a lot. I think more modernly, but no, I've searched and searched and I've never found anything in the sutras. It's irrelevant. It's not irrelevant. It's just there's no there's no pejorative view or negative view of you know value judgment placed on one or the other. Okay, so we'll try to get through the last three. So the actions of mind. Um, so one is to avoid thoughts of greed. So we will always have thoughts of greed. You know, Apple will release some new product and everyone will want it. People will camp up and line up around the block for it. So what is important here is, again, this would undermine your action of giving. It may undermine your generosity if you're hoarding things, right? If you feel that there is a, you know, sometimes there's a kind of a deeper psychological sense of, I lost this thing, so I'm going to, you know, grab onto a lot of these things. So it is actually sort of an erasure for what's really happening. If you ever watched the show Hoarders, it was on cable for a while. They would go to people who have all the stuff in their house, and it was, you know, kind of a sad show. But what I found interesting about it, if you listen carefully, they would usually have a counselor or someone there, and the reason they were doing this is there was some deep emotional loss that happened. Someone they love passed away. There was some opportunity that was missed. You know, there was some deep emotional scar, and the manifestation was this hoarding. So while that's like a huge response, all of us may uh, experience some level of this. We may lose an opportunity and then we become very hesitant to either share our time, our material wealth, our home with someone else, you know, just any sort of sharing. So that kind of you know, covering up, you know, being very careful, you know, again, we want a bunch of stuff. Someone mentioned, yes, some people have a poor childhood and they gather a lot of material things. Where I grew up, people are very poor. A lot of them aspire to become rappers, and the first thing they do is uh, become a rapper, and they buy the most ostentatious jewelry, and they will tell you directly, "I was poor, now I'm not, and I want everyone to see it." And they're very aware, weirdly, about that behavior. But that's a good example. So this, having thoughts of greed again is to have us look deeply, at how our mind is working. When someone says, "Hey, can I borrow your car to go so and so?" and you're like, "Oh no, I just got the car waxed, and uh, I'm not sure," and they come up with a bunch of excuses. Is it your attachment to the car, or you're like, this person's just not a good driver? So those are different. Um, People used to always ask my mom to borrow her car, and she said more recently, uh, people ask and she's like, "Oh, can you drive stick shift?" And they're like, "Oh no." She's like, "Oh well, I would give you the car, but you can't drive stick shift." So she said she doesn't have to worry anymore because very few people can drive stick shift anymore. um, so it's asking us to be conscious and aware. I know of a family that talks about their properties and wealth in code. They have like code words for everything because they have this kind of fear that people will want what they have. And I think that's kind of an example of odd greed, right? They're pre-worrying that people will only want to be around them, so they have this kind of code. Um, Oh, that's a good question. Um, so people who grow up in first world countries can say money doesn't buy happiness, but if you grow up in a third world country, um, you might have a different perspective. My perspective on that is money and material things will provide you a certain level of security, and that will reduce your worry. Beyond the basics, food, clothes, and shelter, and not, having to worry about can you pay the rent next month, there's no increase in your happiness beyond that. It's just distraction. Um, it's just it's nice, but it's not true happiness. Um, Speaking from experience, um, I did not grow up as a rich person, so I knew people in college who were very rich. Um, they were not happy. I have yet to meet anyone who's, you know, beyond middle class um, and wealthy, who's, you know, their wealth has given them the happiness. If they are happy, it is something that they have cultivated and realized on their own. But no. However, yes, I think if you're walking around a third world country, with a full stomach and a sandwich in your backpack, and other people are starving, and you're like, "Oh, money doesn't mean anything to me." That's just not. You're not very self-aware. But the happiest people I've met have been the poorest. Um, the most loving families I have met have been the poorest. The people who have cherished their children the most have been the poorest. So, um, what do we mean by happiness? Would the worry and quality of life improve if they, didn't have to worry about the next meal? Of course, but that's not happiness. Um, and yeah, Christina has a good one. Right? If you have a lot of possessions, you worry about losing them. That's very true. So a lot of people that I know who have wealth, and by wealth I mean beyond you have a Toyota in the driveway of your house or something. You truly have like money. That's all they focus on is keeping it and then worrying about losing it. So then it becomes a burden. That's a real thing. I don't know anything about that personally. I have talked to them at length and been kind of amazed at some of the comments. So, okay, so the next one is anger and hatred. Some of these may seem uncontrollable, and this is where I think practice is going to help us gain perspective on what we're in control of. So one of the things we can, I think, be aware of is being angry doesn't make you a healthier person. Being angry doesn't make people want to be around you. None of us have ever said, "Oh, I have this friend who's always angry. I just can't wait to go over and spend time with them." So at the very least, if we start to become aware of the what anger does to us and how it separates us from other people, then we understand its destructive power. So many of us may have experienced anger. Many times in the Buddha Sutra, it will say, the spark of anger will burn up all of your merits. So if anger really does kind of get out of control, it will disturb the mind more than, almost any other of the strong emotions. It has a real potential to destroy what you've created through practice. When I was younger, I think anger was the hardest thing that I had to struggle with personally. So that was something I had to work on, and it's a very powerful energy. So I think the key with anger, some of us may be very clear there's something in particular that makes us angry, or there's a source of our anger. I think for a lot of people, though, they've lost sight of what made them an angry person. And so that's part of what we need to be consciously aware of in practice. If you do any kind of meditation and you have anger, that's going to be the thing that comes up. I've seen people, turn beet red and even spend a sweat on a meditation cushion. Uh, I've had people use lots of foul language at me in the midst of practice because they have anger, throwing accusations. So in general, I think what we try to do in practice is generate awareness of the source and then begin to generate mindfulness, right? Become truly mindful of when that emotion starts to come up. And this is a long time practice, right? Personally, it took me years. So you start to see when that anger arises and then not latch onto it and give it energy, right? Not give voice to it, not, um, unleash it. So every time we're unleashing it, we're just giving it more and more power. We're um, just like walking through the forest, and you eventually you off the trail too many times, you create a new trail, and it takes a long time to heal that wound. The same is true with anger. So we have to be very careful and aware. Working on anger is something that does take time. Working on anger is something that, at least in my personal opinion, a lot of people, there's a strong focus in the West on meditation as part of Buddhist practice. I really wouldn't recommend meditation practice for people who are struggling with anger. This is something where, serving others, other types of spiritual practice, bowing, cleaning, working around the temple, all kinds of other chanting, everything else in the Buddhist toolbox is probably more beneficial. But if you're struggling with anger, sitting in silence can sometimes just pour gas on the fire. And that's one of the hardest emotions to get at. So we have to be very careful. Are we using the right tool to address um, our our problem or our issue? So that's one of the most difficult things. I think for many of us, anger may arise as a result of past experience, background. Um, I think yes, I would identify with Jamie's comment in the chat. Sometimes negativity from people in our lives can be the source of anger. Um, I think that was true for me. That was one of the things I had to work on when I first came to kind of formal practice. Um, I grew up in the hood, and a lot of people had behaved in ways, and you know what conducted themselves in ways that were beyond my understanding, and it was a cause of a lot of anger. So that's something we have to be very aware of, but it takes time. The key, though, and the reason why we have it as part of the precepts, it's not something you can just, not do. For most of us, killing, we're like, okay, I don't have to worry about that one. So there may be something else on the list. You're like, oh, I don't have to worry about that one. But there may be one of these that we're like, oh, that's tough. Um, just be aware, right? At the very beginning, these are, classically saying, I practice not to do these things. So if you get angry, you just go, oh, I got angry. And that's why the service starts with repentance, right? I'm repenting for all my past deeds. All the times that I did these things, which maybe 5 minutes ago, I'm going to try not to do them again. So this is why it's spiritual practice. We're going to do it. And then when we do it, we're honest. Oh, I did that yesterday. I did that on the way into the service. I had someone yell at me in deep anger 5 minutes before we started the service. I was like, oh, okay, thank you. I'm going to go practice now. I accept your anger and your yelling. Um, so it's a practice. It's not, there's no judgment, right? None of these say, if you were angry, you shall be judged harshly. It doesn't say, if you have anger, then, you should judge yourself harshly and then heap on to your anger lots of guilt and carry the guilt with you like a, chain around your ankle. It doesn't say that. It just says, recognize, right? Recognize, oh yeah, I get angry about that thing. And as soon as you recognize some of the power is taken away from it. So that's the key with all of these. It's just recognize, recognize, recognize. And over time, the energy gets less, right? Each time you're like, oh, here it comes. My face is getting hot. Okay, I'm not gonna let it take me, away. Then you've worked on it. So this is real mindfulness. Mindfulness is really being aware of all of these things functioning. Uh, so, but anger, the sutras are very clear. It's sometimes one of the most difficult. It can be very disturbing to our practice. So it's something that we really have to work on. I'll do the last one, then I'll tell the story. So the last one is not holding false views. So what are false views? False views are any opinion, perspective that we have that goes against the basic Buddhist teaching on cause and effect. So if we are blinding ourselves to the truth of cause and effect, um, then this would be a false view. If we're, holding on strongly to concepts that don't accord to this basic idea within Buddhist thinking, like, oh, I can kill this guy, but it doesn't matter. I can lie this time, but it's okay. Or I'm going to get angry, but I'm justified, right? If we're not recognizing, you know, the that everything we put out, that there's an effect, um, then that is a false view. So this is probably, um, I think a lot of times people read this as, oh, this is Buddhism against everything else, right? I'm not going to lose sight of the truth. The truth is Buddhism, so somehow we're opposed to everyone else. That's not what this precept is about. It's about really seeing, you know, cause and effect, recognizing that anything that we see, think, do, say has an effect, and we need to be aware of it. And the more we recognize that, the more we'll be more in control. Because I think a lot of these things come out subconsciously, but without a lot of conscious thought. We're not really, it just, we find, oh, I said that. Oh, now I have to fix it. We'll be more in control. And these precepts are the things that, as we gain that awareness, make our life easier, make our life smoother, because we have less things to fix, we have less situations to make up for, and we are able to navigate life more smoothly. So one of the questions is, how about controlling emotions? Have a hard time not showing your true emotions. Oh, that is a good question. I think part of what we should practice is awareness of how we really feel and whether we're, being true to ourselves. So there are times when, you may not, it may not be appropriate to express what you really feel. And that has more to do with, if the other person is capable of, reciprocating or understanding your position. But we aren't suppressing, right? It's not a suppression. That we're not we're not Vulcans, something, right? We're not suppressing emotion. You should be honest, but honesty doesn't require us to speak up all the time. Sometimes honesty requires us to retreat from a situation. Um, you know, Sometimes speaking truth to power requires nonverbal action. Maybe you just have to leave a situation. So um, a lot of times, we uh, have to rethink how we interact with different situations. So for myself, when I was working on anger, I needed to take a break for a while from the things that made me angry in those situations. Then when I developed the capacity, I could come back to those situations. And that's, I think, generally the approach in Buddhist practice. Sometimes we need to put distance between ourselves and the trigger. So if you look at any of those things in this list of 10, if one of these things is very difficult for you, right? Just like uh, an addict from recovery, right? Addiction recovery, they don't put you in a room of drugs and alcohol, right? They take you away from it for a while, and you learn the skills so that you can approach it in a healthy manner. It's the same thing with any of these. You need to remove yourself from the situation briefly for a time until you generate more capacity, then you can go back. And then you also have to be very aware of, when, right, when that energy is like getting to the point where you're going to explode, and then you need to again step back, generate more capacity, come back to the situation. So we shouldn't be repressing, we shouldn't be suppressing, but we should definitely be working to a point where it doesn't. It's not like a tidal wave over us and overcomes us. Right? We're able to develop that capacity, but that takes time. It does take time. Oh yeah, that's a good. Some good book recommendations here in the chat. That's good ones. All of these are, the real key is being truly honest about your ability, your capacity, and being very generating awareness. I think the most powerful thing for me in Buddhist practice is generating um, awareness of my own emotional state and my own thoughts. And as a result of that, then, they don't, there's no tidal wave. I can say like, oh, this situation has the potential to be very bothersome. So now that I'm aware of it, I'm going to not let that emotion build up. So then it doesn't overcome. So just being very hyper aware is one of the, I think, great benefits of Buddhist practice. This is not magazine cover mindfulness, benefit, but it is really, really useful. So, any questions about? So we covered 5 more of the 10 precepts this evening. 6 more. Any questions about those? Because I've chatted at you for over an hour, and I want to make sure I give you a chance to ask questions. While you're thinking about it, as we go forward, I'm going to take parts of the service. So what you would see in a typical Shingon service if you were to go to the temple, and some of the symbolism that you'll see in the temple, and try to tell you where that comes from in the sutras and why we have it. Introduce those concepts. So it's sometimes it's a lot easier in the temple. I can just point at, oh, we have this idea, and you'll see the same thing reflected in the statue, and this is why we do this thing. So since we're going to do it virtually, I'll try to do it with pictures, so that you can get a good idea. But one of the things I want to, I think one of the bigger misconceptions, people come to the temple and they may get overwhelmed if you go to a traditional Buddhist temple by the iconography, imagery, pomp and circumstance, so to speak. So there is a reason for these things, and when we know what they are, I think it really helps us understand the practice and why we're doing it. So there's a lot of things that, right, what we learn in different ways. We learn orally, right? So I'm talking to you. We learn, visually. We learn synesthesia, by doing and touching things. So when you go into the temple, you have all of these experiences, right? You're learning through all of your senses, through tactile way. You're not expected to learn only in one way. So this was recognized a long time ago. So there's multiple ways to approach practice. I think Shingon, especially if you're in Japan, the Shikoku pilgrimage is one of those great examples. You're walking through the teaching, and you're absorbing it with your entire body, all of your senses. You're absorbing it through people you come into contact with. So maybe we'll try to do some of that virtually through this class during the COVID time. But I think just knowing that is really helpful. Oh yes, and thank you to Jamie for sharing. We have our social conversation time coming up. So if you're interested in just chatting less formally, please join. So we'll try to offer some of these also. I know it can be a little difficult to just jump in with a question, or you wonder is the question appropriate. If you feel like it's better just in a chatting, less formal time, please, you're welcome to join that too. Okay. So please remember these 10 precepts as something to practice. We are all going to find ourselves like, oh, I did that today. So just recognize and remember that's why we have the repentance at the beginning of the service. You're repenting to no one else but yourself. You're recognizing personally, oh, I did that. You're doing that recognition in front of the Buddha, so to recognize, your ultimate goal. But there's no Buddhist Santa Claus keeping a list of your good things and bad things and rewarding you with a lump of karma coal. So we don't have that concept. So we're doing it to make our life better. We're doing it to make the people we care for happier, and to make ourselves happier. And then by extension, our communities in the world. So hopefully, as we see it that way, it is much more approachable. So thank you for all joining me this evening. I'm on the road, so I apologize for the lighting, but I'm glad that our internet connection is working and we can be together this evening. And we have our regular Thursday evening Dharma talk coming up. And if you can join, I look forward to seeing you then. It's good to see you all tonight. Please stay healthy, be safe. Sadly, our COVID numbers are continuing to go up. So we all need to do our part to give back to our communities by being smart and responsible. So thank you all this evening. Take care and hope to see you again soon. Have a good evening. Good night.